All right, Josh from Barn Finds Garage here today. Out working on our 1980 Porsche 911 SC Targa. So we got this car. It'd been parked for a long time. Zero history. I got the engine going again. We've been working on doing tune-ups and stuff. But we did the brakes because we got the car running and driving. Took it out on the road, and there was pretty wicked shimmy in the steering. A lot of vibration. So initial thought was warped rotors because we didn't know when the brakes were done last. So we went ahead and ordered all new rotors and new calipers for it, all new lines, did all of it. Um, got it all done. System bled back on the street. Was a lot better, but there was still a wobble. Biggest improvement from doing the brakes was that the calipers were both dragging really, really badly. And so we fixed the drag, but we still had some of the wobble, even when we weren't touching the brake. Um, so I was like, well, let's investigate this further. So I pulled out my, oh, where's it at here? Ah, here it is. A handy dandy gauge here, so I could measure our run out on our rotor. Brand new rotors. I checked the run out on them, just whether they were flat or not. Well within factory tolerances, so wasn't that. So I went ahead and I actually started on the passenger side because the run out on it was like 0.004847, something like that. Factory run out, like the limit is 0.002 of an inch, according to Porsche. And so we were out at least double. So the next thought was, well, the hub could be damaged, the spindle could be damaged, or the bearings could be bad. A new hub for one of these cars is like 600 bucks from Porsche, if you can get one. Spindles are part of the suspension upright, so like part of the suspension assembly here. So this shock sits in it, and the spindle right here is mounted in it. So it's not an easy one to pull out. But when I did the brake job, I had noted that they both spindles looked really good. No excessive wear here, no excessive wear there. So I was like, well, it doesn't seem likely to be the spindles, so maybe the hubs or the bearings. So I went ahead and pulled that side back off and inspected the bearings, and so it looked like they had been done. We had SKF brand bearing inner races, which are pretty common. They're not the most expensive, but they're not the cheapest. That's unusual. But let's go ahead and tear it apart. And so I pulled the races out, the outer races out of the hub, and discovered that they were FAG brand. So completely different outer race than the inner race. So obviously what happened here is someone decided to replace the bearings, but either didn't want to do the work of doing the outer race or didn't know how to do it. So they just put the new inners in and repacked it and reinstalled it. Tolerance on the setting on the lash on the bearing was fine when I took it apart. So it was like someone's been in here and messed with it, obviously. Um, But searching the internet, I discovered there's not a lot of information about doing the bearings on these cars. What information there is seems to be a lot of like confusion about how to do it, or I don't know if it's scare tactic to try to get you to go to a professional to have it done. It's not any more difficult than any other car. Matter of fact, our local Porsche dealership recently posted on Facebook how you needed to have them do the work because it's not just your Porsche 911, your classic 911 is not just a Chevy. Yeah, that's true. There's a lot that's special about these cars, but bearings are bearings, right? And if you know how to do them, you know how to do them. Um, you could screw these up for sure, but it'd be really hard to do it. And a Chevy needs the bearings done correctly and just as frequently as one of these does. So kind of a ridiculous statement. But so I've already gone ahead and done the bearings on this hub. Um, but I wanted to go ahead and talk about how I did it and how I didn't ruin the hub because there seems to be a lot of people think that you will ruin these if you do your bearings. You could. You'd have to get pretty crazy and maybe use the wrong equipment. Now, there isn't a lot of equipment that you need to do this job. It's not really that technical of a job. So you've got these outer races on each side of the hub. Now, there are two styles of hubs that Porsche used. This is an earlier style. And so if you look inside here, there are no notches to knock the bearing races out. Most cars have like little notches either on either side of the hub or in 4 different spots that allow you to put your punch on it and hammer it out without damaging the actual hub assembly or the hub itself. Um, this style does not have any notches, so I would say this is the hardest version of the hub to replace the bearings on. But still, I mean, it took me all of maybe 15 minutes to do the bearings, so not that difficult. But there's some tricks to it for sure. So the first thing is you need to get it all taken apart. You need to get it cleaned. We have a parts cleaner, an ultrasonic parts cleaner. I threw it in there, cleaned all the old grease off. I had cleaned them before and then repacked them when I did the brakes, just on these front ones. But we went ahead and cleaned the whole thing out. Since we have it off, let's get all that grease out of there. Makes your job a lot easier, less dirty as you're going on. And then I forgot to grab it. I use a propane torch, just a small bottle torch. You can buy it at any of the hardware stores or big box stores. You don't need an insane amount of heat. The Porsche manual calls for about 150 degrees to 160 degrees. So not a ton of heat. Remember, this is aluminum. Your bearing races are hardened steel. This is gonna expand a lot quicker than these races are. So you don't need a ton of heat. Reading online, everyone says freeze your bearings. I did one with the bearings frozen. I started this job yesterday, so I did that one side without freezing the bearings. I just put them in and just pressed them in. Not really a problem. I froze this set that I did today. It didn't do anything different. I mean, if this hub's 160 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever, or however hot you get it, the frozen bearings aren't going to stay frozen for very long. And I don't think it's going to contract that hardened steel that much. I mean, maybe it made it easier. I didn't notice any difference. If you want to freeze them, right? I did not throw this in my barbecue, or I did not throw this in the oven. People post that they do. You can, right? If you want it evenly heated. But what I discovered is that these cool off relatively quickly. Again, it's aluminum, so it transfers heat pretty well. So I just use my torch. I heat up each area as I'm working. So if I'm doing this bearing, I would heat this side, inside and out. It doesn't get glowing hot. It doesn't need to be that hot. And then you just use a punch, just like you would do on any other bearing. There isn't really a machine to remove these, where these don't have knockouts in the hub. There's not really any way. I mean, you could maybe, I mean, on the small bearing on the outside, you could definitely use a press to push it out. But I didn't. I just used a punch, and I just punched it out. So I'm going to show you what I used here. So I have a punch set, right? Different sizes. This is like the medium sized, one of the larger ones. I like to have as much surface area as I can get. The little tiny ones just really don't give you that much surface area to hit on. And then I used a Thor hammer. So this is like a copper headed hammer or bronze headed hammer. I don't know which, if I'm being honest. But it's a softer metal. We use these for knockoff rims to take the knockoffs off without damaging them. But it works really, really well because you don't want to damage that aluminum housing. And this is steel, right? This isn't like a bronze punch. You can get bronze ones. You can get off other softer alloys or metals. But I just use this steel because this is what I have. And so heat that hub up. I actually did the small race first, and then the big race. That's just how I always do bearings. But so you'll see there's a lip inside that, right, where that race is sitting at. And so you just want to carefully line this up on that edge. And then the real trick, so you don't want to push your studs back out, and you don't really want to put too much stress on the bearing or on the housing itself on the hub. So what I used is a brake rotor. So since we did the brake job, I had some old rotors laying around. I haven't gotten rid of them yet. But so your rear rotors work really, really well to hold your hub while you're punching these bearings out, because they're raised for the handbrake shoes, right? These used a drum style brake for the handbrake in the back. So you got all this nice space here. It gives you room to work, gets it up off the floor nicely. And then I just set it on the floor. Set this back a little bit. Might be able to see it, but have that on the floor so that it's facing up. This rotor is already toast. It's out of spec anyways. You just drop that hub face down into it. And now you can see that race And when you hit that, when you punch that out, it's going to drop and hit the floor. Super easy. Um, you're going to want to preheat it, so you're going to want to wear a glove that you're not, so you don't burn your hands. Not that you're going to get it that hot, but I wore gloves to be safe. If it's warm enough and you get that punch on there nicely, and you use a sledgehammer instead of like a rubber mallet or a house hammer, framing hammer, you just start tapping it out, and you go around the perimeter and you just slowly tap it out. You won't mar the edges unless you hit it really, really hard, right? So you just tap it out. Eventually, the bearing will start to slide. Once it starts moving, it'll just fall right out once it gets far enough down. Then it'll just land on the floor. Now, the back side of this inside bearing, this backside one, you again want a good surface for it to sit on. So what I like to do on those, flip that rear rotor over, grab your old front rotor, set it on top, take your hub and drop it back on like it was installed when it was in the car. And now you can reach that large inner race. And again, flip it over first, heat that outside edge, heat the inside, heat the bearing race. And then once you've got it, I mean, I put heat on it for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. I didn't spend a ton of time heating it, just until it's nice and warm. And I just flipped it over, dropped it down in there, and then again used my punch and just tapped it out. Once I got it out far enough, it just fell right on the floor. Now going back in is a little bit more complicated, but not really any different than any other bearing, right? You don't want to use a punch because there's a good chance you're gonna hit something and damage it, right? So the bearings that I took out, there was a big scratch in one of the races, one of these outer races. Clearly someone had used a punch and missed and went inside the race and scarred it. And instead of replacing like they should have, they just left it. And I don't know the story. Like we don't know the history of this car, so I don't know exactly what happened there. But so you don't want to use one of those. Instead, what you want to use is just a bearing pressing tool. I left my nut. But so this one's from Harbor Freight. You can get cheap ones, you can get expensive ones. Honestly, they're all pretty much the same thing in terms of how they work. So it's just a big giant bolt with some plates. Now the kit from Harbor Freight that we used has different sizes of these. These are what are going to actually sit on the bearing and press the bearing in. So this outer edge needs to be slightly smaller than the outside perimeter of the new race you're putting in. If it's too big, it's going to bottom out and not push that bearing in, which is not what you want. You're going to damage the edge. So you want it to drop right in. And if you look inside here, there's actually some stages of like a lip in here. So this out here, this outside edge is for your seal. You're going to have a rubber, well, a metal and a rubber seal that's going to go on there that's going to seal onto this and keep grease from going out. But then inside, right, you've got the inner lip. That's the diameter, roughly the diameter of the bearing race. So if this will fit down in there and move a little bit, you're perfect, right? And you want to make sure it's going to cover enough of that edge of that bearing race that it's not going to go in weird or damage it. But just plop that in, and then I like to get it set up on my brake rotor, at least for this backside. I like to get it set up like that and put it back on this, make sure I'm nice and level, and then I use my Tor hammer or whatever sledge I'm using, and I just like to slightly tap it in the center just to get it started. And I did notice with freezing it, the bearing race, when I dropped it down in here, it went in maybe, I don't know, a hair more than when it wasn't frozen. So I didn't need to tap it because it already kind of dropped in flush. So maybe that's the benefit of freezing them. But again, I didn't need to do it on the other side. Once you get it started though, then you're gonna put this in on the side that you're pressing in, and then you're gonna have this big plate. Now there's different step rings, and none of our step rings fit inside this. Some of the kits include ones though that do fit inside this inside lip of the hub, which does help with centering it. But it wasn't a big deal because this has chamfered edges. So I'll show you that in a sec, where the bearing goes in at. But so once you get that on, you're going to drop that on. And then you have a big nut that goes on here, and you just twist it. And it just slowly presses the bearing in evenly. And it's going to bottom out. Now I took it out a couple of times to check to make sure I didn't want to like over torque it because this is aluminum, an aluminum hub. I didn't want to risk like cracking it or damaging it. Not that I think it would, but just to be safe, I didn't want to damage anything. I didn't want to like strain it too much. So I just would check it periodically. I'd drive in a little bit further, pull it back out, check it, drive it in. I checked it twice, 3 times, something like that, and just make sure I got it bottomed out. Once it was bottomed out, then that side was done. We're good to go. Now this outside one is a little bit harder because of the smaller diameter. Our kit didn't have a bearing cup that's that small, so I had to use a socket, and we have some like good size sockets that this guy actually fit through. They're for like semi truck repair, but was the perfect size to fit inside this. And like I said, these have chamfered edges, so if you look inside here on your hub, you'll see that this is cut at an angle, and then it goes straight down where the bearing's going to run at. So it's going to somewhat guide whatever you're pressing in there on it with. It's going to guide it in. This side less so. On the back side of it, it's more rounded, but you can test fit it and make sure you're all straightened out. And because you have that lip, you kind of know if you're on it or not. Yes, I mean, really simple to press the bearings in and out, or well, press them in. You could take it to a machine shop. So we have it's like Springworks, something like that. It's a company that just does suspension repair, right? They do leaf springs and stuff. They have big hydraulic presses. I've taken hubs in. Like I said, these aren't really that hard to do. Our Austin Healey Sprites have actually been harder to do the wheel bearings because they're steel and they rust together. So I've taken wheel bearings over to them, and they'll use their press on it and pop them in and out for me, and they charge me like $5 per wheel or something. It's really cheap because it only takes them a couple minutes with the press. Um, but again, I would just use one of these. The horror stories that I've read online and heard from people about doing these and they're damaging the hub is that they're using like a 20-ton press. This does not take that much force to press these bearings in. If you're needing that much force, there's something else wrong. So don't go and cram it in there with some massive press. I mean, these can exert a lot of force, but it's nothing like one of those big hydraulic presses. Um, but so once you get your bearing races in, you're going to want to get your bearings ready, right? So, um, shoot, I left mine in our office. So your inner races are going to sit in here, and you're going to want to pack those with grease. Now we have a actual bearing packing, like grease packing tool. Let me grab that and I'll show that to you. And you just drop your race in it, and then you are literally pressing grease into the bearing. And you're going to want to do that because you want to make sure these have a pretty big bearing surface area. So you want to make sure you're getting all the grease you can into it. You don't need to over grease them, but these these grease presses work great for doing these. You grab it. Oh, it's right there. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. So this guy, you can get it at any parts store. I think I got this one at Napa. Um, so you pre-fill it with grease, right? Grease at the bottom. This plate goes down in it, seals around it, and then this part comes off. You drop your bearing race, your inner race in here, and then you just press down on it, and it has little holes in it that lets the grease go up and into the bearing, and then it just fills the bearing with grease. Let me pause the camera. I'll run in and grab our bearings because we need to go ahead and grease them so I can show you that, and then we'll be able to put this all back together. All right, we grab both of our bearings, inner races, so kind of see how these are set up, right? So spins nicely, but you can see a large surface area there, right? It's really hard to pack these with grease by hand. I don't see how you could. These little ones, it's even hard to do with the grease packer, but uh, like I said, you're just gonna grab them and pop them in this thing. Um, I like to do both sides, flip them over. Press one side, flip it, press the other side. They can be a little tricky to get out once they're full of grease because they create kind of a suction on there. But just move them around, they'll pop out. They kind of self-center too. Okay. You see, starts pushing it through. It'll come out the other side. I need to press it some more. It's almost all the way through, but I need to press it a little more. And then make sure we have grease all the way through on all these rollers. Once you get them greased, you can pop them in. Now, this small one, you can go ahead and press it right away, but you're gonna want to wait to put it in until you're ready to put this on the car because you still have that seal you have to put in. So the larger inner race, you can go ahead once it's greased, you can drop it in, and then you put your seal on, and then you just tap that in carefully and slowly. I use a very, very large socket, another one of our semi truck sockets that's slightly smaller than this diameter of this edge, and then I just drive those in carefully, and then that's then good to go. And the way these are set up, right, you're going to bolt this back onto your brake rotor, and then you're ready to put it on. Once you slide it on, then you can slide your small one on, and then you can put your lock washer and then your lock nut. I'm going to go ahead and get this all prepped, and then I will show you a video up close here of putting this on the spindle and getting this caliper bolted back up. Quick note on a couple of things. So the handbook, or well, online at least, they say you can't release these without unbolting the whole brake system. You actually can. At least on this car, we have like a spring, almost like a metal plate that acts like a spring here, where the hard line goes into the soft line, because these aren't, most cars it's a soft line, it's hard line to it and then soft from the suspension over. This is hard line to soft line back to hard line. But you actually can unbolt this. You just need to make sure that you don't put a lot of weight on that metal brake line. It'll move and pivot some here at the top where the hose meets the hard line. And so I just tied it up so that I make sure it's even. You just kind of undo it, take your brake pads out, and you can then pivot it as you move the rotor out of the way. And then the rotor is bolted onto the back side of the hub, and it's very, very, it needs to be torqued to a very specific amount. It's 17 foot-pounds or 23 newton meters. You also make sure that these surfaces are clean. If they're not, like if you have lots of debris in there, dirt, grease, that can also cause your rotor to not sit flat to the hub, which can also cause you to have excessive runout. That wasn't our case. Again, ours was bearings, but it's worth checking it, right? But just make sure they're clean. Okay, let me finish packing these with grease, and then we'll get this all put together, and I'll show you how to put it on, how to get your rotor back in, and then how to tighten that up and get the lash set correctly on the nut. All right, so I've got my rotor back on the hub. I got my bearing, my inner race bearing put in, and my seal back on. And then I already went ahead and packed this main area here with grease. Just want to get some in there so you make sure you have enough to keep that all lubricated. I like to keep this outer seal here all nice and clean. So I'm going to wipe off this extra here. Try to make sure I don't get any junk in there. When this is all back together, you're going to want to clean your rotor with brake cleaner because you're bound to get some grease on it, but pretty simple to do. So I've got my caliper out of the way here. Spindle's ready to go. So I'll go ahead and just slide this on. Okay. There she goes. And then slide this caliper back in, and that'll kind of help keep it all together there. Okay, and then here's my other bearing already packed with grease. You can see grease coming out the end of that. My camera will grab focus there, that is. So grease coming out the end of it. Make sure we're nice and clean. And then we're gonna Slide this on in. I'm going to lift that, and there we go. Now both of our bearings are in. We'll put a little bit more grease in here. Wipe my glove off here with something else that's cleaner. Okay, a little bit of grease. We don't really need a lot of grease on this, but we'll put a little bit more on there just to make sure we've got a good amount on the outside edge. Okay, get that off. And then we've got our lock washer, which is going to slip on. It's keyed, so it's going to pop into that keyed part, slide in. And then we have our collar. Now this is a lock nut, but it's also a collar. So it's got an Allen key on it. You should have discovered that when you took it apart, right? Taking it off. But if you wipe them down, you'll notice there's a red dot, or at least there are on mine. Some of them I've seen have a yellow dot. Some have like a mark from a chisel, where they've whacked it to mark it. But it kind of helps you line it up with this keyed part on the spindle. So we're just going to pop that on there, and we're going to spin it all the way on until it gets snug. Now the lash on these is kind of tricky. It's not the worst. But so how you do it is you need a screwdriver, a straight edge, and you're going to try to wiggle that lock washer with your straight edge. If it moves a lot, then it's not tight enough. If you can't move it at all, or you have to pry it to move it, it's too tight. And so you got to back it out a little bit. Now the tricky part with this, you can see my red dot, that should be on there tight now. My red dot kind of lines up with my spline. It just gets kind of in the general area. It's not going to be right. You're not going to want to go off of that entirely, but it gets you close. So you grab my screwdriver. Okay, so, and then you got your Allen key that you used to take it off. You're going to use that to put back on. So these hubs have a notch in them to line up with that screw, that set screw. So I like to just go ahead and tighten it just a little bit. So it's a little stiff. I might not have it on there enough yet. Oh, no, that's tight. Okay. So you don't want it to wiggle real easily. So we'll go ahead and tighten it just a little more. Okay, that should be. It might be a little too much. Let's see a little bit more. Okay, now we can move it. There we go. Okay, nice and slow. So what you're going to want to do is take a screwdriver, and this notch gives me a nice little viewport to see it. And I want to make sure that this lock washer moves. That feels too loose to me. It should be kind of difficult to move. It shouldn't be super easy to move. So we're gonna move that notch back up until we get in there. We're gonna tighten it a little more. Getting closer, still pretty loose though. A little more. Now it takes prying. Oh, there we go. Okay, a little tighter. So I'm going to back it just a hair, and then I'm going to start tightening it more. Because it has a tendency to move as you're tightening it. Okay, so I have to pry to move it, then it's too tight. But let's get it to move back over this way. Okay, that's perfect. It moves, but it's stiff. Finish tightening that. We'll move that back down and see if we can move it still. Yep. Okay. Rubbing on my caliper because it's not bolted on yet. But so I got to put, let's see, we got 2 big caliper bolts. These need to be torqued on at 70 Newton meters. I believe that's about 52 foot-pounds, approximately somewhere around there. Tighten those back on, and then we can put our pads back in, our retention clips, and then we're pretty much done. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll start the video back up again to show you how to check your run out on this rotor. Caliper bolted back on. I still need to torque it, but I got it on there tight enough that it's stationary now. And then I've mounted my my gauge here, my caliper gauge, so I can read what my run out is here on the rotor. Now you're going to have some run out inherent of the rotor if it's not perfectly flat. So you want to get those checked, make sure those are smooth and flat. But from there, get this gauge on there. Now you can't see it because of the angle. It's hard to set it up here where the camera can see it right now, but I can see it. So if I start turning the wheel, okay, we go going down, there's 0, up 0.001, back down to 0. Not perfect, but very, very close and well within factory spec. So we can go ahead and put the pads back in and get the wheels back on this car, drop it back down on the ground, take it up for a spin, and see if that resolved our shake in the suspension and the steering. If it didn't, then I don't know, maybe rotors. But based on these specs, everything looks good there. We have everything to do the suspension on this car except for shocks and struts, but I don't think they need to be done. But let's go out. Let's get it bolt back together and take it out for a spin and see how it is. As we fix little things like this, we discover new little problems. So we'll see. Hopefully that resolves that problem, and this car's one step closer to being a daily driver again. They're really, really fun cars. And it's honestly an enjoyable car to work on. There are some little tricks, and it's not always the most straightforward getting information, but the handbooks and the manuals, if you can find them, are very, very good, very detailed. I've enjoyed working on this car so far. I hope this demystifies wheel bearings a little bit on these cars. I haven't done rears yet. Hopefully I don't have to. That's a lot bigger job than the fronts, but honestly, they're not that bad to do. I think most people can do it themselves. Honestly, if you don't have all this equipment and want to pay someone to do it, by all means, go ahead and do that. There's nothing wrong with that. Just know that it's not that complicated. It's not anything to be scared of. If you have questions about doing the job, I know I kind of jumped partway into the job with this video, so if you're curious about how to get it apart, don't hesitate to shoot me a message. We actually have another 911 sitting on the other side of the shop that probably needs wheel bearings done. It needs brakes for sure. So I might do a more detailed video, start to finish, doing brakes and bearings on that car. But we'll see. We're always trying to get stuff done quick here because we've got a website to run and lots of other things going on. But I hope this helps someone that needs to do their wheel bearings on their 911. The more of these on the road, the better in my book. So thanks for joining me today. And again, I hope this helps someone.